It's hard not to have it change your worldview, not just on this topic, but when you see there's a pretty big curtain, you wonder what else might be behind it, right? There's this concept that these things are alien. They are some intelligence, a non-human intelligence from another star system. In 2017, a New York Times article came out that shared 3 videos, 2 of which were captured by my squadron, and I was present for. It wasn't just these 3 incidences. There were incidents we were having nearly daily off the eastern seaboard.
When you take these Area 51 stories and stuff like that and include them into your data, is there correlations or is it not?
There are modern stories that I have that haven't been shared. All sorts of interesting behaviors that happen at some of these sites, especially the nuclear ones. Not just military pilots, but commercial pilots as well. We've been talking a lot about the military. Oh, well, there's a whole different set of incentive structures to keep commercial pilots. If they're from very far away, it just means that the universe is very traversable, and therefore it doesn't matter how far away things are. And if it's from very close, it means the probability of there being life everywhere is extremely large. So if we find one other, then there's probably life everywhere.
Did it change anything in your actual day-to-day life?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't be talking to you if it hadn't.
What made you decide to speak publicly about UAP encounters?
Yeah, it was very simple. I was in Meridian, Mississippi. I was an advanced strike fighter instructor in the T-45 Goshawk, and I was no longer deployable, but a lot of my colleagues still were out on the East Coast. And in 2017, a New York Times article came out that shared 3 videos, 2 of which were captured by my squadron, and I was present for. And they were communicating the same stigma-based barriers within their command structure to further investigate this that we had back in the squadron. And that just put the responsibility of this issue right back on the operator's shoulders that were training for active deployments on the East Coast. And so I, in my training instructor mode, where I had a little more agency and a little more free time perhaps than those training for war, I said, hey, maybe I can speak out about the issues that we were having. It wasn't just these 3 incidences. There were incidents we were having nearly daily off the eastern seaboard. And I wanted people to understand that this wasn't just an interesting UAP story. This was something that was an urgent safety of flight, national security risk that the operators were dealing with, and yet kept getting kicked back down onto their shoulders. And so I said, hey, maybe I can step forward and say, communicate what the reality is here and get the right people involved so that we can mitigate whatever this is.
Were you surprised by how people treated those pilots, including you, that came forward?
I think initially I was surprised at how we treated ourselves. When this was all evolving back in the 2013, 2015 timeframe, we had just come back from deployment. We upgraded our radar systems, and bam, we started seeing these objects on our radars and then across multiple sensors and eventually with our eyeballs. The first time I knew that we saw it with our eyeballs was when 2 aircraft with 4 aircrew in my squadron were flying out to the working areas, and as they crossed that threshold, one of these objects went right between them. The 2 jets were about 150 feet apart. The object came with about 50 feet of the lead aircraft. They visually saw it. And, that was shocking. And you're midair, at the most congested piece of that sky, right at our entry point. Was that intentional? Was it accidental, coincidental? I don't know. But once the safety investigation kicked off for that near midair, the safety officer realized that, after interviewing people and hearing that this was something people weren't really talking about, is that there are 4 other near misses that had occurred just in the previous 5 or 6 weeks that all went unreported. And so even ourselves, right, we weren't debriefing this. We weren't coming back from the flight and going into our 4-hour debrief and bringing this up as a safety issue in our administrative phase of the debrief. It was simply glossed over. And then once it's done, it's, in the ready room, perhaps over a beer going, what was that?
Yeah.
And so we were doing it to ourselves, right? And this was something I had seen there. And at the time, it struck me as odd, but as a new pilot in the squadron, I wasn't really in a position to start, bucking the trend necessarily. I was trying to at least, do modicum of a good job, as a new pilot in a new squadron, right? There's a lot to do.
We will get into the story, like your own story, and
Sure.
I would love to hear as much as you can about it. Just before that, I want to ask, why do you think people are not aware of those things?
Well, in 2012 to 2015, and I try to be very specific about what I can talk about firsthand and when it occurred versus what's happened, because so much has happened over the past 10 years or so. But, starting in 2012, it was kind of business as usual as far as the quote unquote UFO, UAP topic. For me, even it was the same. This wasn't something I had a particular interest in and assumed it was more of a cultural quirk and oddity than it was based in reality. And so there was always in the U.S. this undercurrent of attention on the UFO topic, whether it be from people reporting them, the government investigating them over the decades in various manners, or even just our culture and our media. But I didn't realize it could have a reality to it until we had those experiences. And I think that was the main blocker, is that you're raised in such a way that is an entertainment object. It's a cultural object. It's not something that's real. But when you have that experience, that often can change your mind quite quickly.
Yeah.
And so, back then, I think it was that stigma and not wanting to stick your head up. And of course, as a tactical pilot, your reputation is everything. And we are gatekept by, that career, that profession, by a flight doctor, right? So no one wants to necessarily start prioritizing repeatedly an object that other people don't believe exists, right? It's almost a definition of hallucination if you don't have evidence to back it up. And you don't have to be proven to have psychosis to lose your flight status. You can just there could be some reason to think there might be, and you're grounded for an evaluation for 12 months in the commercial world without pay. And so the incentives just really aren't there. But I think, when people started coming forward about the pragmatic risk that unknown objects in your airspace present in a way that wasn't necessarily saying that because they're unknown, therefore they're aliens, it made people step back and look at it in a new angle and say, okay, well, we have to take stock here in 2018, 2020, 2025 of unmanned systems in our air. We need to know what's happening at these lower altitudes. It used to be easy to perhaps dismiss something in the sky as a U.S. jet, and at worst case, maybe a Russian jet. But when you have dozens of small form factor objects at low altitudes over critical infrastructure and training ranges, we can't just laugh it off anymore. We need to take a hard look at the ramifications, national security risks associated with that. So the conversation has changed quite a bit, but even still, I think the general public is very much lagging in that conversation because they haven't had that necessity to pay attention. There is a lot of information there. That's why our congresspeople, our senators, our federal law enforcement, our space agencies, our federal aviation agencies are taking this serious, but they have a incentive and a reason to actually pay attention to data, where the general public is still in a position, I think, where it's easy for them to shrug it off, not pay attention, and say, I'll pay attention when you show me more.
Yeah, okay, so fascinating. I just want to give you a proper introduction before we start for people who may not know you.
I thought we already started.
Yeah, before we go any further, because you say some amazing things. So you are Ryan Graves. You're a former U.S. Navy lieutenant and FA-18 fighter pilot. Over the past few years, you became one of the leading voices in any UAP, just in this topic in general. And you also founded of Americans for Safe Aerospace.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, okay, so I would love to go further into that as well. But I would love to hear your story and what you've seen. And I think many people are very interested in this. So, and before we go into the story, I just want to ask you about the recent UAP files. Trump administration just released like 400 files in the last month or so. What is the significance of it, and how it relates to what you said about the knowledge of the public?
Yeah, well, what we've seen come out of the Trump administration as far as files related to this is not any smoking gun by any means that we've seen yet, but it's so easy for us to get caught up into how fast this conversation is accelerating that we don't look back and say, 5 to 8 years ago, the government was completely denying there was any reality to this whatsoever. And now, we have hundreds of files that are, what I understand, just kind of a rotating 10% of what's, in the archives that they're going to be bringing out, to say nothing of what might be added to that with further investigation. So there's a lot of information that is now ready to be kind of cycled in on a regular basis, and we're going to see that coming out. But it's easy to forget the progress we made. Where this, they were saying this just simply didn't exist that long ago. So I'm still tepid on what's been released. I'm optimistic that there will be more compelling information released through that process.
What do you want to see?
And I will say one more thing. I'm highly confident that there is material that they could release that would be much more compelling. So I'm hoping that will eventually get released.
Yeah, and nothing that currently has been released is like anything that is of significance in that size.
They seem to be, individual pieces of a larger puzzle where, we don't necessarily have enough pieces to see the full picture yet, right? That's how I see what they're giving us quite now. So I think we're going to have to wait to see what comes out down the road.
And there's anything that you know of or you're open to see in those files?
Well, gosh, I mean, there's so much. One, in some of those releases are cases that Americans for Safe Aerospace has shared with law enforcement partners. Some of those cases had attached classified information of sensor data that was collected of anomalous objects operating in various parts of the world. We don't collect or possess or review classified information organization, but we organize that witness to present that through the proper channels. That is data I think would be very interesting to be released. Others that have been released thus far are similar in their appearance and kinematics, but they're not the specific files. There's treasure troves of data out there I think that could be accessed. Another is all those very sophisticated missile defense radar systems on the east and west coast, specifically in the time range that we were detecting objects off of the Virginia beach, right? Those should have absolutely been within the detection capabilities of those systems, never mind satellite-based systems as well. And I have a high degree of confidence that, what I reported as far as what we're seeing was validated through space-based systems. So again, that data I think would be very interesting to see as well. And I could probably go on for another 25 or 30 minutes, but
I have the time,
there's a lot out there, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll get back into those files because it is shocking, I think, to see it coming so forward in the public conversation due to, I don't know what causes this, but just one more thing about it is some people say it's like a distraction. What do you think about that?
I think people are always going to say it's a distraction. I also think that, the U.S. government is fully capable of executing on things that people might disagree with without there being, this ultimate distraction scenario that is being presented. Just kind of practically speaking, right? I don't think at least the current administration feels constrained to manipulate the public to a large degree in order to execute their will.
Fair enough,
I think that's just a short-term pragmatic answer.
I see what you're saying. Okay, so perhaps we can go right into your story.
Sure.
What have you seen back when you just seen the first encounter that you had? What was it? Yeah.
So, this was back, I don't remember the exact date, but we started seeing these as we were transitioning our jets from the APG-73 radar system to much more capable APG-79 system.
And as you said, it was over Virginia Beach.
It was over Virginia Beach, and it took about 9 months for that upgrade to complete. So there's one jet and then two jets. And as soon as we started flying with the jets with the upgraded radar, we were detecting areas off the coast in our working areas, objects that shouldn't have been there. And our initial reaction was to write them off as a software glitch or a radar error with the new system. But even so, the data that we were receiving from them was very good. It was, what we call weapons quality track files, very stable, no indications of jamming or jumping around or, fleeting signatures. They were very stable and long lasting, and they were being tracked through these kinematic envelopes, whether that be completely stationary and very high winds, accelerating 0.7, 0.8 Mach, about 250, 350 knots, or even supersonic 1.1, 1.2 Mach. Again, sometimes completely stationary, sometimes kind of meandering around.
Stationary is crazy.
It is. People don't realize that requires a lot of energy and expenditure in order to do that, and then to transition to higher speeds and operate for extended periods of time is just not a capability that we have.
It's like in high winds. It's not how much mile per hour.
About 140 miles per hour winds is what these things would be stationary, and it's equivalent of like Cat 4 hurricane, right?
Yeah.
These things would just be locked in. Even in a fighter jet, when you're in those types of winds, we often are, you're making turns, it'll push you 3-4 miles, in that turn. So it's something you really have to plan for, to have this just, and not bouncing around within a volume, but fixed, right, in a location, as if,
There are many sightings that, as you said, some of them jumped around the radar also. But you've seen the stationary part was the thing that caused you to be like shocked?
The stationary and the ability to operate at higher speeds, and then to do so pretty much all day, right? So we would never see these things leave station. So if you see something that's in an area for a very long time, it's like staying still in a river, right? You have to expend energy just to even stay over a fixed location. And so you assume it's maybe balloons with a limited life, right? And then once the battery dies, they're either going to fall down or, continue onwards and flow aimlessly. If you have a more advanced system, they're going to need to refuel or recharge. And even if they take weeks, right, we would still presumably see it over the course of years of seeing this. The only thing we would see is them accelerate and go east very fast. That's the only time I saw them go supersonic, which again is very confusing, from the stationary and then normal speeds and then supersonic, and then presumably proceeding somewhere, significantly far enough over the horizon where we're not going to be able to see them do whatever they're going to do, right?
So many questions, but just the supersonic part, can you elaborate on that? What does it even mean?
Supersonic, yeah. So faster than the speed of sound. And I wish I could give you a number, but it's dependent on altitude. Typically, the altitude, it's dependent on temperature, which, correlates highly with altitude in there. But, at altitudes we'd see them at, you're typically talking somewhere probably around, 750, 850 miles an hour, maybe 900.
And for skeptic people in the audience, could it be just something in the radar that's showing it to seem like it is?
Well, that's exactly what we thought at this time, is not that it was intentionally showing us this, because we are accustomed to seeing jamming and manipulation from adversarial systems, and those present in certain ways. Either this was a revolutionary capability that, made it seem like it was real when every other system can't, or it was real, or it was a software glitch that, maybe made it seem real when it wasn't. And so that was our assumption. It was a radar glitch, right? But it didn't take long, within a few days to a week, where we got close enough to these objects that we presumed weren't real, where our other sensors started to pick them up, including our infrared camera, our electro-optical camera, where we can, no kidding, now look out and see that there's an object there, right? And so now the question isn't, are they real? Is this a radar error? The question is, what are they, right?
Yeah, okay. I would love to go further into it, but I want to keep it for a moment just in a personal aspect of yours.
Sure.
Did you come into the Navy as, a UFO believer, even anything?
Yeah, no. I love science fiction as a kid. I loved understanding the future and reading about it. I love learning about technology and what was coming next. For me, flying wasn't a passion of flying. It was a passion of exposing myself to this advanced technology, getting in a fighter jet, right? Pushing the buttons, operating the system. I thought I wanted to just learn about it, which is why I got a degree in aerospace engineering. But, I had my, realization moment after, late in my college career, and said, I need to do something much more exciting, more hands-on. And so for me, going to fly jets was getting access to that kind of next level capability and operating.
I don't know if people understand how tough it is to get to the fighting jets.
Oh, it certainly is. But But, as far as did I believe in UFOs, no, I love watching movies about them. But again, I thought it was more of just a cultural quirk. I thought SETI was an exciting project. I feel less excited about their efforts at the moment, I'll say. But it was not a topic I was interested in whatsoever. And even when we started having these experiences, there's a few jokes about aliens and UFOs, but it was much more pragmatic, much more, all right, what are these? Let's figure it out. It's probably this, it's probably that. Maybe it's China at the end of the day, worst case scenario type thing, right?
And where do you lean towards right now as a person?
Oh, well, now, we're talking about our thoughts.
Of course, 10 years later.
10 years ago, even more, 14 or so. But today, I've seen so much more information, both understanding what's out there, as well as, the reports and information we receive at our organization. And it's hard to tell what any one case is quote unquote real or represents truth. But over time, when you have enough of that information, you start drawing these connections between those consistencies across these cases that just kind of emerge from the data. And it's very clear from that data set that whatever it is operating capabilities that are well beyond the state of the art. And, that could be, many people like to immediately jump to the concept of visitors from another star system. You could put a dish-shaped craft in my garage, and I couldn't tell you that came from another star system, Maybe it was manufactured here, Maybe we'll get lucky and isotope ratios are different of the materials.
Yeah.
But I don't know. We still don't know in my organization. All I know is that something seems to be operating very advanced technology, both in the ability to operate very large vehicles, very fast vehicles, to accelerate extremely rapidly, and do a number of other behaviors that we can get into later, but things that we just simply don't have the ability to do, as far as I understand.
And we'll get back into the story just in a moment. This is so fascinating. So if it was American, do you think the way that the government are approaching the pilots who are, are saying the thing that they are seeing, is it correlates with this notion?
It doesn't. So,
okay.
I've had this conversation before, and each time I maybe say it a little more exasperately, a little more frustratingly, right? Because the more we talk about this, the more evident it is not our own program, right? Because of the following reasons. One, if there's an accidental spillage of knowledge across the classified barrier, even with people that have security clearances, if they don't have a need to know and they're not read in and they're exposed to that information, it's a very serious matter, right? People can go to jail. People probably will go to jail. The person that accidentally is exposed to it will have to be read in. They'll have to sign non-disclosure agreements. There's a process, right? As one might imagine. One of the theories that is often presented is that, they were testing some system against us, the fighter pilots, in those working areas without informing us. That's highly, highly classified, perhaps using exotic technology, what have you. Every time that happened, it would be the equivalent of someone walking into a squadron, just handing a top secret folder to a random pilot and saying, read everything you want, right? It's no different.
Of course.
So every one of those would be like a prosecutable offense. So it doesn't make sense to me that we would do that not once or twice, but hundreds of times over the course of years. It's still happening today, right? So, and never mind the fact that Congress is now looking into it. You think at some point someone would have knocked on the door and said, hey, no, this is us. And I've heard Congress people and senators have that conversation, say, hey, we've been waiting for that knock, and it just never comes, right?
Yeah, it does come about. Many people think that there is this shadow government behind the government who are actually doing, pulling the strings. And as you said, if it was true, they would shut it down currently as the administration is releasing things and stuff like that.
Now, what I just described to you is how I would reason about how the system works, right? Part of the conversation around UAP, of course, is that there is perhaps a system above the system where there is these waived, unacknowledged special access programs that are not reporting to Congress, and may have integrated this technology into craft that perhaps they operate or
that's my point.
So
yeah.
I don't know. Right? I've never been read into any of those programs. It wasn't my job to research whether those existed. That was more of David Grusch. So my perspective on this is completely from the outside looking in, and I have been, approached and exposed to certain information that gives me, I'll say, a high confidence that such, a project has and probably still does exist. But ultimately, that's not my domain. With that being said, within the data set that we've collected, Americans for Safe Aerospace, it indicates to me that advanced vehicles are operating in conjunction with military or NASA assets in some way, whether that is from a deep, state UAP program that people have ideated about that I don't know exists, but there are indications it might have. Or whether it's something else, I don't know. But, why are black triangles often seen around military bases or landing at NASA fields, but also seen around the world?
Sites also.
Around nuclear sites as well.
Yeah, but I just a clarification. You said that you lean towards this, perhaps.
I lean that as being a small subsegment of what could be possible if one assumes that the U.S. government has been investing into this heavily over decades. And I don't have 100% certainty in that being truth.
Yeah.
But if you do make that assumption, and therefore then reason just to explore what's possible, I think, that would be a logical way of thinking about it.
Yeah, but wouldn't they come, these deep state figures would come to people like you and try to shut you up?
I think that probably, at least looking at historically, has been the status quo, the modus operandi, I should say. With stories, that one can research going back to the 50s of, the Office of Special Investigation, et cetera, et cetera. Again, I haven't been read into any classified programs. I'm simply reporting on national security and aviation safety issues that are real and that pilots are dealing with every day. And those are things that I think any congressperson or any reasonable American would want to resolve. Of
course.
And is good for our country. So I think if someone was intentionally trying to shut me up, they would be going against what I think are very pragmatic, reasonable things for people to be concerned about. So if that's if your stance is evil, then okay, maybe you might want to take me out. But I mean, let's, I thought we're all Americans here, right? At the end of the day. Well, yeah.
Most of us.
Yeah.
Most of you.
In this conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I get it. Just what you're saying, okay? I want to go back into the story, if it's okay.
Sure.
Your first sighting, but also, as you said, it's daily. It's every day till this day.
Well, I can't claim 100% every day, census day, but when we were out there, it was pretty darn close, and I know for a fact that it's still regularly occurring out there.
Yeah, I appreciate the clarification. But what can you elaborate more on the story? What it felt like and what it felt like, trying to tell people what you've seen and talk about it.
So, we start having these, again, we're seeing our radar, we're seeing our other sensors, and then boom, we have this near miss. And this near miss is the first time, at least for me, I had heard what they look like. Because a lot of us before this had tried to go up and see what these look like, including myself. And we'd have it on our radar, have it on our sensors. All this is getting pumped into our augmented reality helmet, right? We can see exactly where it is. It's drawing a box around it. We come to that merge, we slow down, and can't see anything. Nothing there. We turn back around, all our sensors reacquire it. It's displaced, but we weren't able to see it. And so that was kind of what was happening for a couple of weeks until this event where we had a near miss. Again, it was 50 feet from the lead aircraft, 2 jets going out. And again, the first time I had heard that someone had visually seen it, because we weren't really talking about it. And he's like, I was hit one of those things. And we're like, I was the first one. I was like, what it look like, right? That's the big question. And, we didn't have a name for it. We all knew what he was talking about. And he just described it as a dark gray or a black cube inside of a clear sphere. Essentially, the apex, the points of the cube are touching the inner circumference of that sphere. And that's when we had, we're all kind of looking around like, well, this is like an issue now, right? Like, we're physically seeing it. We can't pretend like it's some kind of glitch anymore, like 100% certainty. And and it's getting close to our jets. I mean, 50 feet from a fighter jet at 400 knots is basically someone pulling a trigger from you 5 feet away and it misses you, right? Like it's basically luck at that point. And so, then the safety officer got involved. He started hearing these rumors, did a little investigation, found out about those other 4 near misses of similar objects that went unreported. And we filed our hazard report and went up the safety chain. It was properly briefed to the skipper with the assumption he was going to pass it up the chain, which he did. And we went back to work with the essential order of, hey, all right, it's clearly a safety issue. Don't go near them anymore. Don't go play detective, right? It's not your job up there. You don't have the tools. Let's keep the curiosity contained and do your job. So that's
sounds hard to do.
Hard and not hard. You're up there burning gas at about $30,000 per hour. You got very specific goals. So
you're a soldier eventually.
Yeah. At the end of the day, there's only so much, we only have so much agency. And so sometimes we would have the opportunity to go take a look, not every time, but now it was off limits. And so then we just kind of went about our business for the next couple of years. Objects were there. We had to sometimes cancel training because, our area is like a checkerboard from viewed above, and you take your sub area and other squadrons do different areas, and our area is occupied by whatever those things are, so no more room for us. I guess we'll go home. So we would sometimes have to cancel training evolutions, and we never heard anything back. We weren't really expecting anything. I think generally we were hoping maybe to see counterintelligence or someone start making an appearance or asking questions and trying to mitigate it, but nothing ever happened. And in 2015, we began our workup cycle to qualify us for deployment aboard the USS Theodore Roosevelt. And we steamed down from Virginia Beach to off the coast of Jacksonville, Florida, and we're executing operations out there as a strike group for about a month. And during that period of time, we had dozens of incidences with similar objects. I don't know if they're already there, if they followed us down, but I wasn't aware we had so many incidences at the time. I learned that later. I knew we had incidences in our squadron, and two of the incidences that we had were recorded. They were very good friends of mine that saw this. They were returning from an air-to-air fight. When you leave those fights, you kind of come back solo because you kind of hit your fuel numbers individually, right? Mm-hmm. And so they came back, had a little time before the boat opened up, started detecting multiple objects out there, and flew over to get a closer look. Those 2 objects that they tracked ended up getting released in 2017 in the New York Times article known as GIMBAL and GOFAST video. But at the time, I'm in the ready room. Duty officer tells me my friend got something cool and go take a look at it. So I met him down at Intel and I watched him debrief the tapes that were later released in the New York Times. I heard the admiral was coming down to take a look. They called him down. There's, the image here is, 15 intelligence officers and 2 air crew huddled around, a single screen watching these videos. And someone picks up the phone and calls the admiral, have him take a look. And I slink back into the corner of the room so I don't get kicked out because I wanted to see his reaction. He watched the video for like 4 or 5 seconds and just going, and walked out. And I interpreted that as that he had seen these before and been dealing with it. And so...
Sounds reasonable, yeah.
Yeah, fast forward a couple of years later, or a few years later in the future, I'm now friends with Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet, who is an advisor at my organization now. And he's testified before Congress on UAP as well. He was the chief meteorologist for the Navy in Jacksonville, Florida during this event, and he received an email from that admiral that evening saying, with the subject line, urgent safety of flight issue, and essentially saying, if anyone knows who's operating, these craft that are near our strike group, you need to cease immediately because we've had dozens of safety incidences and we're getting ready to cancel the training evolution. And canceling this training evolution is a massive deal. This has downrange effects of carriers not being replaced, et cetera, right? Of course, yeah. So that's the state it was in, and I didn't know all that at the time. So, back, let's go back 2 years again, 3 years again. I'm in the squadron. I don't know it's that prolific that the whole carrier is having these instances, but we see the tapes. We go back to the ready room. Everyone's talking about it. we're basically just, told to shut the F up and get back to work, which we do. And that's that. We leave for deployment shortly afterwards. My time is up in the squadron. Halfway through a deployment, I come back. I become an instructor in Meridian, Mississippi. And I see the New York Times article pop up in 2017. My friend's voices in it, have a massive moment of deja vu and realize that, there is no counterintelligence coming to fix this. No one's resolving this. We're hitting the same roadblocks in the Pentagon as we were hitting ourselves as squadron mates, right?
Can you just pin a point in there? Just how did it feel seeing it go public? After you knew all the things. Yeah.
Well, when it was frustrating when the article came out. I mean, if that's what you're talking about?
2017.
Major moment of deja vu. And it was weird because I was looking at it and I recognized it, but I had no idea where it was from. The voices sounded like they're from someone else, and then once it all slot in the place, I was like, my gosh, it's my buddies. I mean, one of them was in my wedding party. We were very good friends. We went to training together. We went to the fleet squadron together. The media thing was shocked that this was still an issue, right? That this kind of group negligence was allowed to percolate all the way through the Pentagon, not just with our squadron. That was disappointing to see. And so my first reaction was to call my colleagues that were still flying on the East Coast after I read the article, and I asked them if it was still happening. And they're like, yeah, it's still happening. I was like, is anyone doing anything? They're like, well, there's a general notice to airmen, they're called NOTAM, basically a bulletin of things to watch out for at a particular airport or airspace. And our airspace just had a daily bulletin saying, watch out for unknown objects operating in the working areas. And so it's just the smallest Band-Aid possible, right? Yeah. And so they all confirmed it was still happening. I went into work the next day to the ready room where all the instructors were, and they're all, different fighter pilots from the East Coast and the West Coast. Some I had known back in Virginia, but maybe weren't close to because I was with my squadron. I was like, hey, does anyone remember those objects that we were seeing out there? Not knowing if they had even seen them. And they're like, oh, yeah. Well, 3/4 of the room raised their hand. I was like, yeah, the cubes, right? And the spheres. And I was like, whoa, this wasn't just Ryan. It wasn't just my buddies. It wasn't our junior officers. It wasn't just our squadron. It was basically anyone on the East Coast, at least at this time, had a powerful enough radar that was seeing them.
Crazy.
And so, I was like, this is a big issue, right? This is big and ongoing, and I think critically urgent, and it's just getting ignored for these reasons. And that's why so I was pissed off and frustrated is how I felt, and that's why I decided to do something. And the thing I decided to do wasn't to become a UAP figurehead in any sense. It was to just report to the people that released the video and say, hey, I'm not going to share anything classified, but, it wasn't just those 3 videos. It was something that was happening over the course of years in this area, and it's still happening.
How did the people around you react to you starting to talk publicly?
So no one knew anything, and I didn't do anything publicly until I was officially out of the Navy. I did go to Congress and to the Pentagon to provide briefings to members of the Senate Armed Service Committee and Senate Select Committee on Intelligence.
Oh, you're talking before the actual going to the Congress?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
This was back in 2018. That I was still active duty for that. I attempted to represent myself as an individual. I took personal time and whatnot. I was going with civilian clothes to share these experiences. I got a call the night before from my commanding officer at like 8 p.m. saying that my leave was canceled and I was now in orders. And I was to present myself to the Pentagon at 7 a.m. the next morning before my 1 p.m. congressional meeting. So I showed up and, they essentially just wanted to hear what I had to say, I'll say. They escorted me over and then I gave that briefing to Congress.
I specifically asking about your fellow pilot.
Well, I'm getting there. So no one would really knew I was doing that, and I was intending it to keep it that way until somehow it had percolated down that it was happening, and all of a sudden I was on official orders. So then when I come back, really the only people that knew are our commanding officer and their XO.
Yeah.
And so no one really knew anything. But
so the thing I'm
no one
trying
really
to
knew
get
anything.
into is why you, and what is it about you, like personally? But what is it? Do you see any difference between you and other people in the squad?
I think part of it is timing. I think we had these occurrences. No one wants to say anything about it when they're in, and we're not even supposed to talk to media, right? Get in big trouble for that. And so there's really not like an incentive or a mechanism to really do anything when you're in. When I knew I was getting out, I had maybe a little more agency to take some risks and communicate.
Where I come from in the military, you still don't have as much agency after seeing things. If you go back, to civilian life, you're still under many restrictions.
Yeah, I mean, I have a security clearance now, and I've held it. I haven't burnt any bridges with my actions. And again, I'm not saying anyone is committing illegal crimes. I'm simply reporting on a aviation safety and national security risk, which, as a fighter pilot, I'm pretty sure that was my job, right? And just because people aren't listening, and you have to take steps to force them to listen, doesn't make you a bad soldier. In my mind, it makes you a good soldier. I wish we had more people willing to take stances against problems in the military to improve the status quo.
Of course, yeah, I agree. So let's just continue the story, because there are so many things that's happened since then till now. And you went to Congress and everything. I want to go into it down our conversation, but I don't understand how the daily aspect of it. How was it back then, and how did it change throughout the years till now? And do other pilots talk about it the same way as you mentioned during those flights?
Yeah, they seem to describe similar characteristics. So, I wasn't collecting data when it was happening, right? It was just happening, and we have our memories of it. And then once I stopped flying, I started collecting data. And of course, I don't have full access to pilots anymore, right? So it's hard to say, the data is not overly consistent in how it's understood. But I will say this, back in the 2012, 2015 period, we were seeing these things basically every day. We were seeing on our sensors. We didn't always have the agency to go up and investigate them and visually ID it and continue on. But they were always out there, and they were kind of far away. They were out in areas. They were kind of not really in a swarm, but generally in a quadrant of the area, right? They didn't seem to be operating together, but generally in the same area, but independently. Yeah. That was kind of my worldview of how these things want to operate. And sometimes it'd be stationary. Sometimes it'd be zipping east very fast. The
east
reports
towards the
water,
sea.
towards the sea.
Ocean, yeah.
Now the reports I receive from the East Coast and other fighter squadrons around the U.S., these things seem to be more aggressive. So instead of just kind of being out there, you'll have two jets that are turning, and one of these things will zip by right in front. It'll stop in midair. It'll wait for the jet to turn on it and go up, and then as soon as the jet gets close, it'll shoot off down its wing line. And so these things seem to want to be seen now. They are more, they're getting closer. They're rapidly moving in sight of the aircrew, almost trying to get their attention. Not necessarily to hit them. I don't think these things are trying to ram or anything like that, but it almost seems now from the reports we're seeing that these things want to be seen in some way, and then will stop very fast and then shoot off. Almost, I hesitate to call it playful, but seem to be sending some sort of message, right?
Whoa, yeah.
And it seems to be happening less now too. And part of that is, I think, because I'm not receiving as much data, of course, but even still, it does seem to be more sporadic, but more aggressive.
So many questions. Okay, so just in the technical part, because I'm having trouble to understand what does it even mean, seeing those things daily and seeing them, and you can't do anything about it, and you still see so many anomalies included in this sightings. So how do you even grasp this?
How do I grasp it? Well, I've been giving you a lot of technical evaluation of my memory in this, but to think back on how I kind of grokked it, right?
Sorry if it's an odd question. Yeah.
No, I feel like I'm not crossing my arms to be defensive.
No,
it's a good question but unfortunately the answer is not going to be very satisfying. Which is, again, when you're a pilot in positions like that and you're operating that machinery, you're in a different state of mind, right? You're focused, you're executing your scan, you're planning 20 minutes ahead, you're managing 150 variables. So it's very easy to ignore and just compartmentalize, put it in a box, right? It's like, okay, there's boom, unknowns over in this corner. I'm staying, west of this line, not my problem.
But
right?
it has so much, consequences on your daily life just by knowing it.
I think for us, at least for me personally, I'm not saying these are the right answers, but it's in my mind, we had delegated that responsibility to the commanding officer and up the chain of command. And here we are standing by, collecting some recordings. We have, come talk to us, right?
Of the system.
It's not our job to investigate this. We don't have the resources. We're training because we're an expeditionary group that goes on aircraft carrier and conducts war. National Guard, the Air Force, they have an operational responsibility to the U.S. These are the people I would expect to take care of that. Yet, like I said, the 2017 New York Times article really illuminated that there were these barriers. So I really, I think we just kind of shrugged it off. We laughed. We made some alien jokes. We put it in the box. We said, okay, it's probably a risk. Maybe it's China. Maybe it's something else. We'll see what happens. And then, it just becomes this thing that you just throw away in a box and you're not worried about it because it's just not part of what's your priority when you're up there.
As a military person, I know that the importance of the chain of command and being humble in this manner. So I totally understand, but I don't know if the audience perhaps understand it as well.
Well, especially as a new guy in the squadron, right? Like I have faith in the system, right? Like I think it's going to work. I assume this is just part of it, right? Because there are threats. Countries do spy on us in these areas. We get briefed on it. Here's another one, right? So let that process spool up, and yet it never did.
Now, do you still think that this is, delegating it forward is the right approach because people are taking care of it, or now you're less skeptical?
I am. The conversation is so much more complex now. It's almost not even a fair comparison, right? So I think at the time that was the right thing to do, right? To let the system take care of it. But I think at the same time, both things can be true. That it's also the right thing to push past the system when the system is failing, right? And we've had a iteration of different offices that have been, stood up to look at the UAP topic since about 2012 or so, in such a rapid succession that clearly it's not working. Right? We have ATIP, and then we had AOI MSG, which God knows why they named it that, and then we had the UAP Task Force, or vice versa, right? It's all very confusing. These organizations pop up, pop down. So I feel confident now that the government has started looking at this. I don't, right? I don't feel confident because, one, this is still happening to pilots right now today, and they still don't have proper reporting mechanisms. Not just military pilots, but commercial pilots as well. We've been talking a lot about the military, but since I focused on this more,
great point.
Before I testified before Congress, and as I started coming out with media and Joe Rogan, New York Times, people started coming to me and sharing information with me. And eventually we stood up Americans for Safe Aerospace. The process is make it actionable. And, this is absolutely happening every day to commercial pilots, not just far off lights on the horizon, but, objects within a few thousand feet of their cockpits around the world.
This is more complicated to understand why those things don't come out the same way, because they don't have this chain of command.
Oh, well, there's a whole different set of incentive structures to keep commercial pilots, in place. And even with the obvious and most, forceful, which is it used to be against the law. It used to be against the law for pilots and others to report, quote unquote, UFOs in the 70s and into the 80s because they believed that it was going to fill up the response lines for identifying Soviet aircraft that might be flying into the U.S. And so, well, at least that was the rationale that was provided.
But what do you mean by criminal?
It was punishable by time in jail. I forget the years and a fine.
Report it?
Yeah. Essentially, the rationale was you're clogging an important information line with nonsense information, right? So it was punishable by jail time at one point in the not too distant, past. But then, in modern times and afterwards, there was always a stigma associated with this. There are risks to commercial pilots in that, one, you can work an airline for 30 years. You get a number on day one, and that number follows you the rest of your life at that airline. And it bases your pay and your scheduling and your quality of life. So this number is very important. And if you have trouble with management or you lose your position at that company for whatever reason, there is no lateral transfer in the industry. So you can be a senior pilot with 30 years experience. You're going right back to position 0 at whatever airline you get a job at next, and basically starting your career over, right? That is your career. It doesn't matter how many hours you have or experience. Yeah. It's that number, right, when you're in the commercial airline. So what incentive does a pilot have to communicate on a topic where their management has been known to send cease and desist letters, legal threats to pilots for talking about this publicly? Why would they do that?
Yeah,
and by the way, if they're talking about something that perhaps their flight doctor does not believe is a real part of the world, they're now eligible to be evaluated for psychosis and hallucinations, which even if they pass that test, they'll still be grounded for 12 months without pay, essentially frozen while they evaluate that. So again, what's the incentive structure? So it's very easy for pilots to just go, nope, don't want to report that. And you can hear it time and time again. And in fact, Steven Spielberg even made fun of this in his movie Close. Not even made fun of it. He brought attention to it. In
Disclosure Day?
No, not even that one. Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Oh.
The movie starts with the pilot sighting. And at the end of it, the air traffic controller said, do you want to report a UFO? And he's like, it's quiet for like 8 seconds. He's like, no, we do not want to report a UFO. And even today with the pilots, the reports we receive from commercial pilots and others, I can tell they feel like they're doing this against their best personal interest, but they think it's important because the time is right to understand this more. And so that same perception and same stigma absolutely is still today. And it's one of the reasons my organization has worked with Congress to generate legislation that would officially classify UAP as a aviation safety hazard, thus protecting pilots, allowing them to talk about this under existing workplace safety legislation and whistleblower protection laws. And so that's legislation that we're looking to get enabled that will basically provide a clear path for pilots to report without fear of retribution.
And this is the main agenda of the organization.
The legislation is one part of it, but ultimately it's to lower the stigma.
Allowing pilots to have a clearer path to give this sightings.
Absolutely.
So, okay, we'll go into it in a moment because it's fascinating, but I want to go back, if it's okay, because the thing that I think most people will have the most trouble to, the most mind-boggling thing is how come these things only show up in bad quality radar things, and if people till this day commercial pilots seeing those things, we don't get anything clearer. But this is a thing that I want to address. But the way I want to approach it is, when you first saw the GIMBAL and the GOFAST videos in 2017, was it the exact same thing that you've seen by yourself?
The GOFAST looks similar, and the objects behind the gimbal object, which are not visible in the FLIR, look similar. And so what those would typically look like is just kind of like a point light blob. Sometimes like a IR flashlight was shining right at you, kind of like scattering, scintillation effect. But the gimbal object, as you might recall, has some structure to it. It has these kind of vortexes on the top and the bottom. You can see them.
Tilting,
it rotates, so it seemed to have, that was a unique shape that we hadn't seen before.
But did you, by your, you mentioned before in the conversation, with your eyeballs, you've seen things.
I did not see them with my eyeballs specifically. Yeah. I was one of the guys who would come up to it with all the sensors on it and try to see it, and then it wouldn't be there, and we'd circle around. And we do that multiple times. So unfortunately, I never got my eyeballs on it.
So all you have seen is through the radar.
Radar and the electrical, optical, and infrared camera systems, right?
Yeah. So,
and it's a repeating trend, interestingly, where often these things will show up on infrared, but are not visible optically. And that's I talked about signals that pop up around cases. What makes these things anomalous, right? There could be kinematic parameters such as its velocity or acceleration. It could be its energy usage, its duration, its time on station. It could be its signal management capabilities. It could be that it's not emitting any RF. It could be that it is not emitting infrared in the way that we expect, or it is emitting perhaps high energy particles in a way we wouldn't expect. These, and optical stealth technology, right? These are things, used to be fantasy, things that DARPA and others have been working on for at least a decade. But to think that one can't maneuver optical bands around an object when we can bend RF bands around an object seems trite. So, these are advanced capabilities, some of which we could pull off, but when you combine them all together, is not a capability that I'm aware of, right? And it all comes down to energy. I think at the end of the day, the ability to operate
supersonic.
Supersonic, stationary, rapid accelerations, and doing those behaviors all day.
Yeah, and if you add infrared things, it's not surprising that a thing that has the capabilities of those sorts can have also those capabilities. But did you ever entertain the idea of it being actually from outer space? Is it really something that you consider, or you're being?
I considered it was a true anomaly, but I didn't therefore assume that anomaly meant space aliens. Right?
Yeah, but there's a distinction that I want to make between, the formally what you are reporting, which I understand needs to be very, structured, but perhaps, in your own mind, in your own bed at night.
At the time, I think I was, maybe that was all I was mentally prepared to absorb at the time, but I was fine with it being an unknown. Like, I didn't say, all right, this has got to be aliens. Like, I was totally fine. And maybe, naive enough to think that, in some sense, it had to have been, our own government, right? Just from a perspective of safety, right? Like, someone's going to handle this, right? It's either us and it's a mistake, or counterintelligence is going to fix it because it's someone else. But again, we're just putting it in that bucket, right? We're not... I'm not out there philosophizing on what these are at night. The closest I get to that is occasionally my wife and I would be at a brewery and chatting with someone randomly, and I'd have a cool story to tell about the weird orbs that we're seeing out over the ocean. And I was, it's a fun aside, but people would get kind of shocked, be like, wait, what? And let's start to process. And I was like, oh yeah, fun story. But, didn't really kind of see the larger picture of what we were dealing with.
The orb thing is in the latest files that was released, I think is one of the most compelling things. They had an orb that another orb came out of it and shot from it or something.
Yeah, that's another trend, another signal that I often see, where there seems to be kind of this mothership orb type behavior.
Crazy.
Yeah.
But the answer is that you don't entertain this.
So I didn't at the time, right? That was my reaction as this is unfolding, right? Now, 14 years later, the amount of information I've received about, from just regular people, school teachers, business people, venture capital, business owners, up and down the socioeconomic ladder, who are having very similar experiences. Never mind, our trained operators that are often operating sensor systems and whatnot. And, we have over 1,100 cases at our organization. I'd say out of that, about 100 of them are extremely high quality, that are both highly corroborated either through other individuals that are trained observers across military systems, perhaps with sensor data that I might not have access to, but exists. That also demonstrate highly anomalous behavior or kinematics or structure, right? There's too many of them. There's too many of those for me to ignore. There's too many signals that pop out. And while I don't have the definite answer, right? And I don't have a belief that it's aliens or a belief that it's this. People like to throw out time travelers or some kind of interdimensionality. Yeah. And frankly, I think time travel is probably almost as good a guess as anything else, right? Yeah. If you are moving anywhere near, a significant portion of the velocity of speed of light, there's going to be time dilation effects, right? So you're essentially traveling time if you are actually moving through space-time. Yeah. If they are perhaps creating some type of space-time bubble, they could mitigate those effects. And I know I'm getting off the track.
No, this is crazy. This is so fascinating. I love it. Yeah. Thank you so much for the elaboration. So many things. But two things. First of all, the Tic Tac, David Favre, you call him a colleague? Him and Grusch?
I would consider Fravor a colleague.
Grusch is very different.
Grusch is I never worked with him professionally. We have different backgrounds. We've come into, we know each other from the conversation a little bit, but we don't work together.
He's more of an intelligence guy, so it's different. Yeah. But Fravor is a colleague, you would call him. Yeah. So your colleague, David Fravor, in his Tic Tac videos, do show some anomalies regarding this, time traveling. Yeah, like it pop out in one place and then seconds after in another place, which we don't know how it did.
I mean, for those that aren't aware, Commander David Fravor basically came upon, after he was directed to it, a very large Tic Tac, about 40 feet in length. They basically maneuvered around each other before the thing shot off, basically disappeared and then reappeared. Is probably as good of description as accelerating to that other location. But the other location was specifically a pre-briefed location that only the aircrew in that flight knew, which was very interesting, and the controller on the ship.
So many things in this story are interesting, incidents.
I want to get back to what I was trying to answer, though. So there's all these options, right? Time travel and aliens and all that. I don't know, right? It could be some combination. It could be something that we don't even have, right? The right literary frameworks to even describe, or scientific frameworks, which is part of reality that we haven't interfaced with mathematically, right? Yeah. I don't know. I will say, over time, I can't help but feeling that maybe like the most obvious answer is the right one, right? Which maybe they are just from another star system, that could just be maybe that's the simple answer, but I just I don't have enough information to say.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I wanted to go further into this. Just we excluded the possibility of it being American with logic in the beginning of the conversation. Do you think the same about it being, Chinese or Russian or something like that? Because it's too much of farther down our capabilities scientifically,
So my rationale, my reasoning on why it's not potentially a foreign adversary is as such. And it's just risk reward, right? So what we're seeing is I'd say I have a very 90% confidence that it's utilizing technology which is novel or beyond state of the art, right? It's not just a fancy drone that's packaged in a certain way. And there's a line there, right? There could be new propulsion capabilities. There could be, higher energy density storage. There could be more stealth capability or onboard autonomy, so that it's, their sensors could be passive. So some of these signal management capabilities could be actual drones. There could be performance increases and whatnot. Or they're using, a novel technology to be able to do this. But whatever that mechanism is, if we assume it's China, what they're doing, or any other nation, what we assume is that they are then taking that very novel, very advanced technology and deploying it at scale over the United States, continental United States, over our working areas, in our air defense identification zone, deeper into the U.S. as well, and have been doing so consistently for years. To what end? Like, any one of those is a vector where the thing could malfunction and fall to the ground, and that novel technology is then captured by the U.S. What is the intelligent value of essentially invading the United States, right, legally, that they couldn't get from sensors or satellites in space? I don't think that there is something that would necessitate that level of action. Therefore, I think there is certain elements of this where, and I would say this with a high degree of confidence, that yes, foreign actors have been identified through through our data set and these investigations, but by far it doesn't cover,
Yeah, I didn't even went to this explanation, which is mind-boggling as well, but just the way of creating such a thing, I don't see how, they wouldn't use it in their economy if they have this.
Exactly.
You see, we see what they do in the industries. The same equations of energy are being,
exactly. If they had a fundamental energy breakthrough, I think they'd probably be investing a lot more in the AI data centers right now, right?
So, okay, let's go back just to your opinion about these things, because, we excluded this anomaly as well, but going into, let's just attack this criticism that, Elon Musk said it very abruptly, which is, how come we never see it in any clear, a 4K camera? Why is it always through a blurry radar? What's your answer to that?
Yeah. So, again, let's just reason through it, right? So there's a spectrum of camera technologies out there, from a cheap camera phone to a highly sophisticated synthetic aperture radar or Hubble-sized telescope pointed down at Earth, right? That can read the numbers on your cell phone from space, right? So there's a spectrum, right? And the vast majority of people, right, have access to, only so much, only the lowest quality ones. And within those low quality ones, the consumer versions of them, a large portion of those are iPhone cameras and whatnot, right? The best camera is the one you have. And what are those designed to do, right? They're designed to make your selfies look pretty, to make your sunsets look pretty. And so they insert AI to the images. They take high dynamic range images. They leave the shutter open for a period of time. They provide corrections to it, right? They're not designed to take, perfect, raw, unfiltered photos of objects, small objects at range, right? I don't have an answer for why over time people haven't captured some photos. Yeah. I think an argument could be made that people have, and they've typically been dismissed. I mean, you have photos from the McMinnville case in Oregon where, I forget what day, it was 50s or 60s, I think it was. But, I mean, they have a photo that has been tried to be debunked for decades and yet, still stands the test of time. And, you could probably point to several dozens of various instances from the gimbal video to the McMinnville case and say, well, what about this one? What about this one, right? But that's that whole thing where people don't want to take the time to say, okay, I'm actually going to really consider this and investigate the circumstances and make an informed decision off of that. They see something and say, well, that's fake. That looks like a bowl, or that's garbage, and just throw it away.
You said AI. I think we can exclude this as well because it's only the last couple of years which is available. But
so there is photos out there, but at the end of the day, people nowadays think that because everyone has a camera phone, therefore they can, take a perfect picture of something that is an unknown distance away. You can take a picture of the moon and see what it looks like, right? What about obviously the highly sophisticated stuff, the stuff that is designed and in space in order to track objects in the atmosphere or in orbit, right? So that would obviously be the holy grail because it's that ultra high quality stuff that, has the most promise. And I think, based off of the statements of Senate and congressional members, that data does exist, and that I'm hopeful that we'll see some of that come out through the process that we're going through.
Yeah, absolutely.
And seeing stuff from the military systems, however, are designed for a purpose, right? And so what is being released? The low hanging fruit, right? The AT FLIR and the infrared camera footage, where that's not classified anymore. It's old technology, and what's that designed to do? It's designed to target the ground. Right? It's not designed to track aircraft in the sky, those systems. They're designed for me to figure out which window to put a bomb through. So to think that, you're going to be getting these high fidelity images of objects that might have propulsion mechanisms that prevent, optical signatures, such as having a plasma field around it.
That's what I thought is
manipulating the environment in different ways. Right?
Yeah, so the only way that they could pop up is through a very sophisticated radar and stuff. Which has the capability of seeing this.
And again,
just if I can, you mentioned before that many people come to you, like in a brewery and all those things. Mm-hmm. They come and they just give you their own personal experiences and stuff that they've seen, and you say it happens a lot. So how do you sort? The scariest thing for me is because I want it so much to be true, just from curiosity thing. So just because of that, I don't trust my own mind to be able to sort, the things. And how do you know it's not just muddying the water, just making you even less of qualified to see what is true and what is not?
Yeah, it's a fair question, and you say you want to believe, and I get it, and I think if we talk longer, I might convince you that maybe you don't want that to happen. Right? There's different sides to this, of course, right? But
hopefully we'll get to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm going to ask you to repeat the core question.
Yeah, because many people come to you and say that they want.
Okay, I'm back. Yeah. So, everyone has this inclination to immediately assess information when it comes in, right? It's subconscious. You almost can't help it. Someone tells you something and immediately it's like, that's good. That's bad information. You know, you pull away from it or you lean into it. And whether it's my training in the Navy or just the necessity of this conversation, I've trained myself to avoid that instinct, right? To immediately not try to assess the information as good or bad, to just hear as much about it and assess the context, and take it and put it in that filing cabinet in my head, right? And store it there and say, I don't know if this information is good or bad, but I know as much about that particular instance as I can.
Yeah.
And I'm going to just wait and see as I put more files into that filing cabinet, you know, what are the connections between these that pop up?
Yeah, but people invented Star Wars, you know, people can invent anything.
No, of course,
Yeah,
right? You can invent. So, but at the end of the day, you know, with human intelligence, you know, and that's exactly what this is. You either get to one or two conclusions, that, you know, you're finding useful signals that represent reality, or that you're finding some kind of indication of mass psychosis, right?
Yeah.
Or
is it just
shared
noise?
hallucination and things of that nature, right?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm not talking about noise. You could throw any individual case or subcase, but again, it's these signals that are kind of left, that second order data that comes in once you have the mass, right?
This is
So,
big data.
like, all right, if I keep hearing about certain kinematic effects, you know, one thing I think, you know, someone might come into this and say, all right, I'm going to pretend I saw a UFO, and, you know, I say it flew in over the side and I watched it and then it zipped off like a bullet over here. Many cases, you know, I would say almost 30 or 40%, the objects don't zip off. They just disappear right in front of the person's eyes. That wasn't a signal I was too aware of before I started hearing many of these cases, right? And hearing the same thing from fighter pilots and commercial pilots and special operators and farmers in their backyard, you know? So are they all interested in UAP and have found some interesting thread and have all just lied about it, right? Or misinterpreted it or what have you the same way? Maybe, but what if I have 200 cases like that? What if I have 500, right?
Can you share some of them? Because just in any, you know, in any way that you can. What is the most shocking thing that you have heard with your collecting this?
Well, I won't claim what I'm about to say is the most shocking in any sense. But I think it's a good example that kind of crosses different domains. So this was, I believe, in about 2022. It was a group of five troop transports with 5 Marines in each one, 25 soldiers in Afghanistan. And they were transiting from one forward operating base to another that was several hours away. And it was nighttime and they were doing their thing. And they saw something in the sky. And what they saw is something that is often reported by pilots, often gets dismissed as Starlink. And what it was objects that seemed so high up they had to have been in orbit, that were bright and that were seemingly interacting with each other, almost as if you were watching a very high altitude orbital dogfight. Very sharp turns, going in and out. And there are some new visual effects that Starlink and other low Earth orbit satellites can cause this misperception where it looks like they're turning, because there'll be a band in the sky essentially where the sun is only in that band. It will only reflect in that band. And so a satellite will come up, it'll hit the start of that band, it'll start reflecting, and then it'll hit the end of that band, it'll stop reflecting. And at the same time, another one's coming up in a general same direction, 40, 50 degrees off, and then it hits the band and it's illuminated. And now it looks like it's reflecting, but it's just 2 satellites kind of entering and exiting these visual bands at the same time. But when you have a continuously illuminated object that is circling for extended periods of time with other objects, that's not consistent with any type of satellite in orbit. And so they were watching these objects, but many pilots report this. Like I said, what's unique about this case, they watched it for about 20 minutes, and then they noticed 2 of these objects, and there's about 6 or 8 of them in total. One, they're in the same part of the sky as well, near the Big Dipper, which is something I've reported on before. And again, they were just there for about 20 minutes, so not orbiting, but just playing way up there. And they watch it, and they watch 2 of them get still over time, and that's fine. They kind of confuse them with stars, and they realize they're getting bigger. For me as a pilot, what my brain immediately goes to is called a constant bearing decreasing range, which is what I'm describing when an object on your cockpit becomes fixed on your cockpit and it's very
Yeah.
hard to see it moving,
They
that means
come
you're on a
close.
collision course,
Yeah.
right? And so I'm like, when I hear him tell a story, I'm like, oh man, those things are descending, right? And then of course he tells me they watch these things descend for about 20 minutes till one appears to stop at about 2,000 feet over their head. They start slowing down at this point, and they watch the other one pull down about 20 feet to their 11 o'clock position. So basically right over their trucks. They stop. This object encircles all the trucks. They get out. They're watching it. I mean, they're like, is this an ID or what are we dealing with here, right? And they watch this thing circle them and cross over their heads for about 15, 20 minutes before it climbs back up to altitude, joins the other one, and then they just both off proceed. At this point, they look up and they notice the other ones are gone. They don't know what happened to them.
Up towards.
Yeah, it went just right back up to altitude until they lost sight of them.
Just, I think I need a clarification for. Usually, what altitude are these sightings?
All altitudes.
Oh,
I mean, from surface
it
to
varies.
100, presumed orbital at 150 to 200,000 feet in low Earth orbit, potentially beyond. So all altitudes. This case is interesting because many people dismiss these because they like to write them off as Starlink when they're clearly exhibiting orbital mechanics that is not consistent with Starlink, and then descending down all the way to the surface level, 20 feet above these soldiers, who described it as about a 15-foot diameter disco ball from their description. Many facets reflecting a lot of kind of the moonlight and whatnot and emitting some of its own light from it. And it was overhead about 20 minutes and went up. So it's very interesting because...
What does it say?
That's the first case I've heard where we've got a visual look at what potentially these very high altitude objects are. The size is consistent with the same size of the objects that we were seeing off Virginia Beach. We were estimating to be 5 to 15 feet in diameter. Aero, the office that is investigating these within the Pentagon, in some of their releases, has also estimated these things are about 15 feet in diameter. The willingness of soldiers in a combat zone to allow an unknown object to hover over their heads for 15 or 20 minutes is a problem as well, right? They had no procedure or understanding of what to do. I'm happy they didn't shoot it. But right, like none of the scenarios are good here, right?
Yeah. Do we have a visual of it?
No.
Okay.
No.
But so this tells you you are collecting this data and you are cross-examining it with other data and you see what comes up, right?
Exactly right. So these are some of how you can start to build some of these connections that I think are valuable. Yeah. Are these type of reports going to provide us the ultimate answer? No, probably not. But what they are going to do is just build this pattern and allow these conversations to reach a level of acceptability where we can inform policy and policy makers on how we can deal with the actual pragmatic issues at stake here, right? We're not saying you pass one piece of legislation, this whole thing is figured out, but there are real people who are in a vulnerable state and at risk because they don't have a way to properly report and mitigate the issues that this presents. And it's not just commercial pilots. It's not just military pilots. It's state law enforcement. It's local law enforcement that are receiving these reports, and they often report to us. Even just in New Jersey, over a 5-week period, we have over 1,500 reports from local law enforcement. A researcher we're affiliated with queried every jurisdiction inside New Jersey, and you can see the mass confusion that whatever those encounters were caused to the public, right? So we're not saying one thing is going to fix this whole thing and make everyone happy with the situation, but there are real problems that we can fix here that at the same time will bring in more information, allow us to understand this better.
I see this is a win no matter what will happen in the with the documents that's coming out. If you can make actually the policies to change and help get the pilots and people seeing the things to actually be able to properly give the data, I think it will help a lot. But two things we left behind that I want to go into is, first of all, you're leaning towards the abnormality of those objects. They come from another place, another dimension, and anything can be possible. So I would love it if you could elaborate on where do you go with these explanations. But just About Virginia Beach, what is it about it? That's there is the place that
Well, I mean, you
most
have
of
the
the-
largest naval base in the U.S. Navy in the world in Norfolk, Virginia, and then about 10 miles to the southeast, you have the largest concentration of Navy fighter jets in the world, and one of the largest collection of fighter jets anywhere in the United States. So, I mean,
This is the
I
reason.
don't think you have to think rationalize it any further. Not to mention, you have Air Force, Langley Air Force to the north, which houses F-22s, which provide rapid protection for Washington, D.C., and they're 100 miles north. You got Washington D.C., so it's it's an important area.
It is logically okay. So what about this? And you said before that I would perhaps wish it wasn't alien.
Well, I mean, ultimately there's a lot of uncertainty there, and I'm sure we can imagine some scenarios that wouldn't necessarily be perfect,
of course.
right?
Yeah.
But
You mean say
so
say-
yeah, there's this concept that these things are alien. They are some intelligence, a non-human intelligence from another star system that could be very far away or not very far away. They could travel here below the speed of light. Perhaps I have a technology that enables them to travel near the speed of light, potentially faster than the speed of light. And I realize, this is all pure speculation here, right? And, I can, we can back of the napkin how to create a craft that can go 0.7 C. I don't think we can back of the napkin a craft that goes 1.8 C, without making some pretty large assumptions. But again, we're making assumptions here, right?
but
We're
you
exploring
have
the
to.
space. So,
yeah, you have to in order to.
so
expand.
these things, if that's true, one, I think one of the most important things to consider immediately is that if there is one other life out there, there's probably many, right? And so it's very likely that we wouldn't be dealing potentially with a single actor.
Yeah.
If they're from very far away, it just means that the universe is very traversable, and therefore it doesn't matter how far away things are. And if he's from very close, it means the probability of there being life everywhere is extremely large. So if we find one other, then there's probably life everywhere.
This is rules of biology.
Yeah. So, many people think that, okay, if we're being visited, it's just one other thing and that's it. I think that would actually be the unlikely case. I was listening to a gentleman who was part of SETI recently, who not the biggest fan of the UAP topic, expressed that anyone in our galaxy would have known for 1 billion years that Earth was interesting, because that's when you'd be able to start detecting, certain chemicals in the atmosphere that would indicate life was here. Maybe not intelligent life, but at least some life. And that would by far make it the most interesting planet in our solar system, at least, and probably many others. Or 1 billion years, that would have been detectable.
Yeah.
If something wanted to come here to evaluate us, one, again, you can reason about it, that they've had plenty of time to get here. They've had plenty of time to get here and then go back to the other side of the galaxy and go back and forth probably 10 times, right? Even at only about 0.6 the speed of light. The solar system is 300,000 light years in diameter, and we're talking 1 billion years here, right? So, so even at very simple speeds, we could get there in a reasonable amount of time. So is that possible? Ultimately, even within our understanding of physics right now, general relativity, there are, solutions to Einstein's equations that allow for the manipulation of space-time such that people believe we could create propulsion systems. The math has been done, not just by random people, but by respected physicists and propulsion engineers at NASA. We just don't have the engineering to potentially create those systems that are being proposed. And they're not fully fleshed out, of course, right? But we can see a glimpse on the horizon that this is a possibility, even within our current understanding of the universe. So, what does, we could probably go on for another hour about, different areas here, but, what does that really ultimately mean? It means that the likelihood of us, being visited by one or more is probably very high, and that the odds that is a new phenomenon are also probably pretty low. That's something, if we have been interesting for 1 billion years, it's very likely that things have come to check us out much earlier than the past 200 years or so, right?
Yeah.
So that all reasons for me. That all makes sense that things could have been visiting here. That it would be a bit foolish, I think, for us to constrain what civilizations that might be hundreds of millions of years more advanced than us might be able to accomplish when it comes to traversing the universe. Of course, we may look back and realize that how we thought we traveled around the universe was silly, right? Perhaps the secret is to somehow quantize our individual waveform and just, entangle ourselves and beam our consciousness to some other star system through some magic, we don't really realize yet, right? Maybe it's not about brute forcing our way through the large macroscopic structures of the universe, but to, manipulate the finest grains of reality in order to move ourselves around or have, access to new dimensionalities that, we're not even aware of exist.
With the pace of how changes are made to our technology these days, 1,000 years in the future, you can't even imagine this planet.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, if you go into millions, it's not even a question.
Mm-hmm.
I totally agree with what you're saying, with the reasoning of it. What is the best criticism that you heard about this that you think is perhaps, gives, I don't know if correct is the answer, but perhaps, the most likely?
I'd say the best criticism, most of the criticism comes from those within the current paradigm, right? That have a hard time of thinking that something outside the paradigm can exist because they say within our paradigm, all our data reinforces our current beliefs. So therefore,
but we just show how the data doesn't show the.
Well, it's again, not everyone wants to take a hard enough look, or they have different standards. That the whole extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence is unfortunately a shifting bar based off of who wants to be convinced.
Yeah.
Sorry, I forget where we were originally going with this.
No, I just asked what is the best criticism.
Oh,
yeah.
So, a lot of people say, and I'm not overly impressed by those people who confine their thinking to what's possible today and make assumptions that nothing fanciful can be possible in the future. I think, probably the best criticism, if you will, isn't that it can't possibly be real or can't possibly exist. It's just intelligence that could presumably exist would be of such a high level and so much more advanced to us that the interest in us might be so low, right? And I don't necessarily agree with that argument because I don't think, again, there's just this one other entity or this hierarchy where there's a pinnacle where everyone eventually reaches and looks down back at those dirty apes at the other side of the table, right?
Yeah.
There's a spectrum, I think, just like life on this planet,
but
to a much higher degree.
Yeah, you mentioned the life on the planet, which is a billion years, just in the if I'm not mistaken, right?
Billion years.
Yeah.
Was
So the last 15,000 years are some of the most radical changes that a life in this planet has managed to accomplish. So I think this is very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So is this the best criticism?
Yeah. Well, for me, it's the best criticism. Everyone, I think, has plenty of rational arguments they could, try to put forward about human psychology and, mass delusion and, optical illusions and all these types of things. But these are just nitpicking one or two cases. They don't really get to the heart of the matter, the ones that can't be picked away.
Yeah.
Those are conveniently ignored in these conversations.
Yeah, totally agree. And I would love to see what...
I wish I had a better answer, frankly. Sorry to interrupt, but most of the criticisms haven't been overly convincing, frankly, at the end of the day, because I think the people that are finding the criticisms don't even provide enough credibility to the conversation to invest the time into doing a truly deep dive into it to provide reasonable scientific criticisms. They just sit on the outlash and use convenient inconsistencies that they've discovered in order to dismiss things much larger.
I come from a place which puts in a very large scale, not only my specific country, but puts religion explanations above all things.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it presumes it's in this explanation that we are like the top of the chain, the God created us and there's nothing else. And I think most of the dismissive part of the conversation comes from, there's billions of people in the world who still believe this. I don't know if it will ever change. I don't know if it should change, but it puts life on this planet as the top of the thing that is capable of being in existence.
Not every religion, not every religion. Christianity, of course,
the big
creates
three,
humanity as supreme being on this planet. But I think the easy rebuttal is me as someone that I won't say I have a large amount of knowledge about different religiosities, but at the end of the day, it's a bit. I think. I think it's placing a human limitation on the grandness of everyone's gods to say that their limit of capability is to produce us and that therefore they can't produce anything else. That seems us putting restrictions on God, not necessarily the other way around. God putting restrictions on the universe.
Yeah, it is paradoxical, but I think this is exactly what I'm saying. People, this is where this logic breaks, because it can't be the case that we are the center of the universe. As Galileo had the exact same reaction when he said we are not the center of the universe. People just dismissed him all across the board. So perhaps it's the same thing all over again. We are not the most unique thing in the universe. People can accept it.
Many religions do have a hierarchy of beings as well. And again, I'm more familiar with Christianity, but you have angels and demons and that are they're not holy creatures, they're not divine, but they are of a more grandeur than the human, right? So I think in a lot of religions already baked in a hierarchy of higher beings, of non-human intelligences, if you will. So I won't claim to have the answer, but at least with different religious experts that I've spoken to, they seem to leave a lot of room in the conversation for what that grandeur of God might be in His creation.
I agree, and perhaps it more generates around Christianity. I think Muslim and Judaism are more dismissive of this. But I'm not sure. We have a gap in here. But okay, I have so much thing. I hope we will get to everything. But I want to proceed with the story that your own story. What is the things that happen in the timeline between the 2017 GIMBAL and GOFAST and everything that you are seeing to you testifying in Congress? How it come about?
So, when I was still in the Navy and getting ready to get out, I recorded a small documentary with the History Channel that followed me going to DC that first time, with the agreement that they wouldn't air it until I got out. And that aired, and that was in 2019. And then later that year, in 2019, I was featured in a New York Times article. That was one of the most read articles of the year. It was in the top 10. Shortly after, I did a 60 Minutes episode, and then Joe Rogan and different media, and it just kept snowballing, right? It was just kind of one thing after another. And as, I got out there and told my story more, there was different opportunities that were available to better understand this. One of those was with the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, which is about a 40,000 plus professional organization for engineers and scientists in the aerospace field. And I founded and still chair today a UAP committee within that organization with about 40 or 50 PhD types, where we're understanding this from the human factors perspective when it comes to reporting and interactions, as well as the hardware factors. How do we detect, characterize, and evaluate these objects? And so I started to work on the technical aspects of this through that organization, but it soon became clear that it wasn't necessarily the technical aspects that were the challenge at the moment. It was the communication. It was a stigma. It was the lack of policy and seriousness around this. It was me going on news channels and, having to sit through the X-Files theme before, they get to my segment. That needed to change. And so with some help, I stood up Americans for Safe Aerospace, intending to be that vehicle where we could work on the public education piece and educate Congress. But because of all the media I'd done, I started getting a ton of reports, just regular people that reached out via email or LinkedIn or any medium they could get to me, and they wanted to share their reports. And so we started building this database, and we were realizing, wow, this was, we can make this information actionable. There's gaps here in national security and aviation safety and police response, what NASA could be doing. And so we started filling those gaps that should have been filled, and we started coordinating with all the agencies in the executive branch and elsewhere that needed to coordinate that weren't. We were finding those allies within those organizations that wanted to help with the topic. We'd bring them together. We'd serve as a central point to figure out how it could be helpful, and we'd kind of glue those pieces together to allow these people to work. And the goal was to wait for some top-down support, right, to kind of build what we could with the access we could, until the culture and the Overton window shifted enough where there'd be more top-down support. And we've seen that in Congress, but even more recently, we've seen it with the executive branch, with President Trump declaring that he's going to be releasing information related to UAP. And that's part of the process, the pursuit process that we've already talked about, where information is at least started to get released. But again, I'm being patient for more compelling information.
Of course, yeah. So the next big thing that happened after you leaving the Navy was putting up this organization. We started in 2022. I got out in 2019. I was doing all the media between 2019 and the AIAA was in 2021. And then in 2022, we started creating ASA, and we got our nonprofit status at the beginning of 2023. And a few months later, I got the call to testify before Congress in July of 2023. Please elaborate on this part of the story.
Yeah, so, I'm not really sure how it all came about, but long story short, I was contacted by someone from the congressional offices who stated that they were planning a hearing on the UAP topic. They listed some names of some people that they were considering inviting. I was actually the first person they had spoke to.
Do you know how they what the snowball effect that started this in their?
I think it was just a accumulation of media attention on this. It never stopped, and I was going to Congress at this time, knocking on doors, having meetings with representatives as part of ASA, educating them on this, including some of the folks that held the hearings. And so I think there was just a lot of grassroots energy that, showed people in Congress that they should pay attention to this, because ultimately, right, that's what they're there to do, and that's how they get reelected. And so you show them that, there's a big enough base for this, then they're going to start paying attention. That's what they've done.
Yeah, it is, glad to hear that this is the case, that this is how it comes about, because it generates from the public.
I think, I honestly think the public attention was more of a permission structure than convincing. I think the people that were in Congress that are having their constituents come were basically being given permission to pursue something they're already interested in.
Oh, I see.
If I was being honest, yeah, in most cases.
So you've got the call. What
yeah, and so not too much to say about it. I had a time and a date. I knew Fravor was invited. I didn't know who Grusch was yet. In fact, when I was first invited, his name wasn't even mentioned.
Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah. So it was like you were individually being selected. You weren't like being a group or any.
No.
Yeah.
Nope.
In any way.
No, like I said, they told me first, and they had a few ideas of who else would participate, and Grusch wasn't on the list. Maybe there was intentional, or maybe not. But so I said yes, and about a week before the hearing, David Grusch came out on News Nation and shared, what he was going to testify to, which was, a lot. I actually didn't watch it. I don't know why. I watched a few highlights, but frankly, I was like, I just want to hear it live. And so, off to DC, met Grusch in the back room for the first time before the hearing. And out we went. It was time to go. Fravor was in the back. Grusch was in front of Fravor, and I just kind of mulled near them, and Grusch grabbed my two shoulders. He's a few inches taller than me. He just brought me up in front. He's like, "It's your show. Get up the front." I was like, "Oh shit!" And then boom, door opened, and off we went. And it was a whirlwind from there. I mean, very surreal.
Why?
The cameras flashing, the whole 9 yards. It was a very powerful moment.
Oh, the scale of it was
Yeah, I mean,
surreal.
we walked in, people applauded. The place was full. There was 500 people lined up down the hall. As we went in from all over the world. I mean, I had never seen anything like that. I never expected it to be like that. Frankly, I don't know what I expected, but I never expected to be like that. But it was a powerful moment, and it was. I think it'll be remembered as a pretty impactful moment, for opening up a lot of people to this.
Yeah. Is this the biggest thing that happened in this aspect? In after you starting to talk.
I think so. I would call that the biggest one. Not to degrade Joe Rogan. His interviews are always very widely watched. But
of course.
many people are like, I saw you on Joe Rogan. That's 90% answer.
Just here before we started, the people were like, oh, I saw you on Joe Rogan. But I meant like big, in more formal aspect.
Impactful to the overall conversation. You mean?
Yeah.
There's so much going on by so many people behind the scenes. I don't even want to say that hearing was the most impactful, because there are people working on this topic that people haven't heard their names. They're doing such fantastic work, and I think that's where a lot of the rubber's meeting the road. But as far as in the eyes of like the general public and for people who haven't necessarily been paying attention to this, I think that hearing was extremely impactful.
And you said something that was very interesting to me, that you didn't know about the David Grusch story until the testimony itself. So how does it feel? How did it feel to hear it?
It was, I mean, it was, it's a lot. It was a lot to take in, and be sitting there hearing that for the first time. And I'm not just hearing him, I'm hearing his lawyer who's sitting directly behind him, leading in, going, no, just giving him his comments. So I mean, it was
very cinematic.
I didn't know where that was going to go, and it was fascinating. It wasn't uncomfortable, it's like, in some way it's like being in the jet, it's like you're just totally locked in, and these kind of things are bouncing off you. You're not sitting there interpreting them or processing them. You're just not in that mode.
Yeah.
No.
I'm not sure how it is in the jets, but absolutely the thing that I got mostly from the military, I think, is this: you just doing your mission, things come about. This is your day. You wake up to a day and you don't know what will come up. Everything is not the way you expected it, and you just need to sort things out. Yeah. So this is what you're saying.
I'm in the process of sorting. I'm not in the process of interpreting. Yeah.
Absolutely understand. But what did you think about the details of it? Like, how did it meet you?
None of it was like overly shocking, I think, in some sense. I think a lot of things that he has said, I presume that information existed based off of what I have been involved with over the past few years, but I didn't have the details or the depth of knowledge, or the didn't know that he would lay out such facts on such a large scale so bluntly and matter of fact, right? So even if kind of what's coming, it's still shocking to hear it presented on that stage, to Congress people. It's such a long way. Even every year is like an exponential leap in acceptability on this topic, and even that time, that was a big moment, and even since then, we've come so far.
How did you feel about including yourself in the same topic of conversation?
Yeah, it was a little unsettling. I mean, I wasn't oblivious to the fact that my involvement, the aspects of what I'm talking about in this conversation, there's a Venn diagram and they overlap here, right? Course, I get that. I wasn't oblivious to that, but I don't know, in some ways it was refreshing just to kind of get it all out there so people understand we're talking about the same thing in some ways, right? So it wasn't shocking. It wasn't like I was suddenly had a bad taste in my mouth or anything like that. Like I kind of knew what I was signing up for to some degree. And, in some ways it was more ripping the Band-Aid off than anything else.
I see. And, okay, when you were about the stories, with the bigger anomalies, like not just seeing things with jets, like the Bob Lazar story or stuff like that, did you talk with anyone like this who gave such a... weird story? I've
spoken to Bob once. Just ran into him at an event.
Oh, really?
But we didn't really. Wasn't there to pepper him and grill him on a story or anything like that. So, it's Bob. Like many of these stories, in the UAP lore, I didn't walk into this as a historian of the conversation and didn't intend to become a historian of the conversation necessarily. I wanted to see where those, interesting facts that I could put in the filing cabinet were, but in some sense, I almost didn't want to be exposed to like the literature, if you will, right? I wanted to just receive data and understand it without having, this clouded judgment of, decades of research by, various qualities and things of that. I didn't want to come preloaded with all that information in some sense. So I'm not a big historian in it. There's obviously many fascinating cases, and I've read about many of them now that I've kind of been more indoctrinated into this. But Bob's is one of those stories where it's it's fascinating, it's interesting. I look for connections, but ultimately there's nothing I can do with it. You know what I mean?
But do you see connections? Like he says things about the technology that I don't see it correlates with all the other UAP stories.
I don't see anything in his story that correlates that wasn't part of the general lore anyways at that time, right? As far as like gravity manipulation type thing, right? So it's hard for me to say, is that a new piece of information there, that's unique and an important signal, or is that something that could be derived from, decades of books that came out before that about how these things were maybe propulsed, right?
I see.
So ultimately, I can't make a determination. I don't have enough information, right? So it's interesting. It very well may be true, but as an outsider looking in with no inside knowledge, it's impossible for me to really make any connection. But when I look to, the data set I have, I don't, he reports, behaviors of lights flying around, all that's consistent, but again, that's not a well-kept secret either. So it's hard, ultimately if something comes out or there's some documentation perhaps that's released as part of this effort that will validate part of his story, then it'll be, I can have an opinion, but right now I just don't.
I'm asking as, a big data scientist, perhaps even this is what you're actually practicing. So when you take these Area 51 stories or stuff like that and include them into your data, is there correlations or is it not?
When you say Area 51 stories, I'm thinking of just Bob Lazar here. There's others, right? A lot of them, depending on the time frame, might represent stealth aircraft or things of that nature. There are modern stories that I have that haven't been shared that are around some of these types of facilities, and it's very clear that there's some strange stuff going on. Repeated orbs, patrolling perimeter fence lines. Beings being seen during training evolutions where the training is stopped and it's like real world exercise all of a sudden, and these beings disappear. There's all sorts of interesting behaviors that happen at some of these sites, especially the nuclear ones. If I was to say, my hesitation is I don't know what the full history of sightings around Area 51 are. My strongest ones are really, Bob Lazar's story. There's many stealth aircraft stuff and lights in the sky, and none of those are inconsistent with things we haven't reported. But there's many other bases too. There's many other places we do things where the sightings haven't just been historical, but have been modern. And so I'm sussing all those out in my head right now, right? The kind of big picture stories like Bob, and he's talking about hand scanners and, hangars. That's not the type of data we typically get, right? It's more about the kinematics and the objects and the shapes. And yeah, the shapes he took his friend out to see are consistent, but orbs moving fast is a pretty consistent through line.
So most of the things that you are getting, perhaps this is because of your background, which include only, aerial phenomena.
Perhaps well, I don't get a lot of people that come to me that profess to be whistleblowers of the program. And it's, I don't advertise it for it. I still have a security clearance, like I said. I don't want to be soliciting people to become illegal whistleblowers in any sense. If there's a lawful path, which there is now, we can help them make sure that information passes along the proper path. But people aren't coming to me to reveal classified secrets about programs. That's just not the lane I play in.
Great answer. This is exactly what I was asking. Okay, so I want to go back into your part of, moving the conversation forward. What is your plan for what are you're doing with the organization, but also just, with the media presence and everything? What do you hope to accomplish?
So, the way I see the organization now, it's kind of like a wheel, right? We get reports in. And in that is valuable data that bring in multiple ways, right? New connections, new modern cases around military bases, or new highly credible witnesses or data, all of which is valuable for making it actionable and bringing it to particular agencies or organizations, all with the witness's permission, I might add, and say, hey, this witness spotted something over a military base. Do you want to debrief this person, talk to him, and we go through that process. That's one way to make it actionable. The other is the other side of the wheel, which is publicly communicating these reports. And so we want to build this system, and we're building it out now, where the data comes in and it is immediately supplemented with as much external information as possible about one report. And so say we have a pilot calls up and he has a sighting of a very large craft that 3 other pilots saw. So what can we pull about that? Can we scrape social media to see if there are other sightings in the area? Can we look at air traffic data to eliminate the fact that, it was another air traffic, or find potential other witnesses to the case? Can we pull satellite data to confirm it's not, a satellite flare if it so happens to look like that? So how much can we supplement any one report and then quantify it and say, okay, it's not something prosaic, or it is, and here's what it is, with a certain degree of confidence, or here it is, we don't have a prosaic explanation, and here it is ranked in how anomalous it is, right? So if it's just dogfighting lights in the sky for 5 hours, that is anomalous, that is strange, but it's not necessarily as anomalous as, say, a craft landing at a school in Africa, right? So, I mean, there's a spectrum there, right? And so...
And you grade it
so we grade it, right? And so we're not necessarily providing it. The goal isn't to answer every single report with an explanation. It is to sort and quantify them into how anomalous and how unexplainable they are, so people can invest their time into that. Right. So that's what the work is doing. And, there's a lot to do there. We could be scraping public open source camera systems with advanced AI to be able to scrape out these objects. We could be using commercial space data. It's really just a budget limited operation. Mm-hmm. Then we take all those results and we publish them and we share them across our website, across a new podcast that we're launching in a week, where we're interviewing these witnesses directly, all for the first time, coming forward about it. Op-eds, right? Information packets for congressional members, law enforcement related information around critical infrastructure for, say, the FBI, aircraft reports and safety reports with UAP to pilot unions and to the FAA and to NASA, right? And so there's a lot of places we make that actionable, and we can share it publicly and through these organizations. But as we share those reports, it's not just bringing another report out, it's bringing another witness out that's credible, that's a trained observer, that is an ambassador for this conversation. These aren't just people willy-nilly sharing something. They've realized the risk to their career as professional pilots, but they still feel this is very important and have often had their worldview changed by their experiences. And I think every one of them is more than just a story. It's an individual willing to step out on that ledge to provide more credibility. And as we do that, we're going to get a lot more reports, right? They see, hey, if this guy can do it, I can do it. Or I saw the same thing, I'm going to report it. We see it every time we share. And so now that we have this consistent methodology we're building up, that's going to create more reports, which is going to create this big cycle, which is going to continue to lower the stigma and provide policy updates to Congress on this.
It's a brilliant funnel.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple of questions, because I think, first of all, how do you actually changing the policies inside of those all those establishments about how pilots can come forward?
Yeah. So there's very system-friendly ways, right? You can find the program manager for the Aviation Safety Reporting System, ASRS, that's managed by NASA and the FAA, right? And you can try to get them on board and provide them with recommended updates to their system, to their database schema, so that they can collect these reports. I can't force them legislatively or policy-wise to do it, but I can prepare them for it, right? And I can educate them on why it's important, so they become that advocate and are educated, so that when the top-down comes in, they're ready to go and they're educated on that. And we can do that across multiple organizations, and it's had a really big effect in how these organizations view the problem and what's available at the president's disposal when he does step down in order to ask for this information.
What's has a stronger impact, from the bottom up or from the top down?
It's hard to say which one. I think you need both, right? We saw in the early days when it came to UAP reporting within the Navy, right? The government said, okay, well, great, we'll create reporting. And they just created a single order and kind of published it, but that's different than training the operators and the middle management and the commanders to actually prioritize and execute upon this, right?
Yeah.
At the same time, if you just get a bunch of pilots and commanders at a few squadrons interested in this problem and don't provide them an infrastructure to report and have this information made actionable, that's useless as well, right? So you have to have both. But it's easier to affect hundreds of interested regular people at these organizations than affect the president directly in a lot of cases. And so we set our energy on to helping these people stand up these efforts across these organizations.
I see, yeah. And you've mentioned something that's very fascinating, that you have like an aspect of the organization which like makes it making it hard for the case that is being presented, like trying to debunk it, even if I could say, right?
Yeah, or say there's not. I mean, even worse, right? Before, just saying there was absolutely nothing there, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That everything is just a balloon floating by. That was the general stance.
How do you actually do it? Do you have enough manpower for this type of thing?
It just we have reports, we have credible people, and it doesn't take hundreds of them, right? I mean, how many fighter pilots coming forward saying that there's $40 million systems are detecting things before you believe them, right?
Of course, yeah.
And we've had dozens. So, I mean, at a certain point, it's hard to ignore what's right in front of your eyes.
Yeah. Okay, so I have a question that I didn't quite understand through your story, which I was really hoping to get, which is, how did it affect you personally, all of this experience? Did it change anything in your actual day-to-day life?
I mean, I wouldn't be talking to you if it hadn't.
Yeah.
I did all the things that we just discussed, but at the same time, I was also working in the defense industry. I was working at BAE Systems, FAST Labs, their advanced research and development within their electronics sector on advanced planning and autonomy control technologies for DARPA, Strategic Capabilities Office, and more. So I was being exposed to, cutting edge technologies of drone and warfare and autonomous combat systems, et cetera, et cetera. But this was always the threat. This was what was always driving me in some sense. It was, I want to understand those technologies so I can better, cut through the crap when it comes to the data that we're receiving. If I understand what our state of the art work is that we're, looking to field in 10 or 15 years, then I probably have a pretty good understanding of what's beyond the state of the art, right? And that's the whole area that I'm working in. So it was always this split, my life immediately split after that into the UAP topic and what paid the bills, right? and kind of got my curiosity.
Yeah.
Ultimately the draw was just too large to go away from it, right? And I've invested myself personally and professionally into this topic. So it's completely changed the trajectory of my life. It's changed the how I view the world. It's hard not to have it change your worldview, not just on this topic, but when you see there's a pretty big curtain, you wonder what else might be behind it, right?
Whoa! Just on that, and I had another question just with what you said before, but on this topic, what else do you think is behind the curtain?
Well, it's not necessarily about one particular thing, but it's just growing up, right? You grow up and you think your parents are gods and can do nothing wrong, and eventually you see them for the humans that they are, and I think it's the same with our government, right? We all want to have this faith that our government is in control and has everything figured out. But, eventually I think, especially through this conversation, you grow up and you realize, how many manipulations and veils there are and how much more there is to know. And I don't know what those things are, but, there isn't only one secret. I'll say that.
Wow, yeah. And you say it's just the human nature, perhaps, that you are learning when you grow up to understand, and then they see it's humans running the government, so anything can happen.
Exactly. Yeah.
So just in regards to my previous question, your personal life, I mean, also if it's okay to ask, the family life and everything, how did it impact anything beyond like you?
No, I mean, my wife and I been married for 14 years. We met when I was a aspiring pilot in the Navy before I had even flown. And she has been an absolute rock through all of this and supportive. It's not a topic that is something she's studied or is fascinated by. She's generally interested, but she's been incredible support through this. We have 2 children, an 8-year-old girl and a 1.5-year-old boy.
Congratulations.
and the girl is old enough to be interested, I'll say, and I'll just say she's not going into the world thinking it's a small place.
Yeah, but those things like go from beyond you to them. Do you get anything from the mass exposure and the fame?
Oh, I mean, no, I'd say, as far as the fame's concerned, I'd say it's, only pretty selective, right? It's not something that really interferes, with my normal life. She thinks it's cool to see her dad on TV once in a while, but
but it's a specific type of fame,
Yeah, ultimately, I don't think she's truly old enough to truly understand. She just thinks it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, perhaps that she go older.
I wish I had a better answer. I'm curious to see how it unfolds, but I think she's just at a stage where it's, it's big blocky colors of ideas, not necessarily refined ideas of the implications and the size of the conversation, right?
Yeah, thank you for the answer. There's no wrong answer in this, because humans are fascinating to me, and everything that happens to them is fascinating.
Oh, yeah.
This is really fascinating just to see how it could affect anyone's life. Being in your position.
I feel very fortunate. I absolutely can imagine my life being such where my spouse was not supportive of this conversation. And probably that was probably the likely scenario. So I feel, very, very fortunate.
Yeah. Okay. So I just want to ask another thing, which is, what is do you think from your position, what will be the future in this field?
I think we are on a trend line and a path right now that's not going to slow down for a while. There's what's seen in the public, but there's the investments that are being made across different agencies within the government, not only over the past few years, but even specifically in response to the president's recent demands in this area. Real effort is really being stood up in a way that is going to continue this conversation, I think, for a period of time. I think the amount of information and the compellingness of that information, I think there's a good chance that will grow over time here. I don't think this is going to stop in the next few weeks. I think we're going to continue to get these dumps. I think more information is going to be found as this process goes along. And I think, like I said, I think it will... I could imagine this being like a frog boiling in the water type scenario, right? Where, the temperature starts pretty low and kind of ticks up slowly before, but then, all the frogs get to the same temperature at the same time under that model as well, though, right? And I think that could be a beneficial way to do this.
Yeah, but is it, given an administration will be changing, you think it's, given, motivations aside, you think this administration is doing it because this is his current goals and it will change in the next administration? Is it possible to go backwards?
I certainly wouldn't count it out. I think that there is a lot of incentives that President Trump has in order to bring this to some level of conclusion, if you will, prior to the end of his administration. But I suspect that the amount of energy and hard dollars and offices and public attention on this, that this will probably be a presidential debate conversation, not a will they or won't they. So I think this has risen to a level that this will be a question that presidents are asked before they go in, for sure.
Whoa,
it was even last time as well, and it was still more laughed off, but I don't think it will be laughed off to the degree this time around.
Fascinating. Okay, so again, thank you so much for coming, and really appreciate the time you made for this conversation. And I just want to ask one last question, which is in the coming years ahead, people who are got to hear in this conversation, but they're still skeptic and want to know what to get a tool for sorting out by themselves. What to hear and what is noise and what is actual sound.
I think that's one of the larger problems right now in the conversation, is there is not that perfect place of information to point to people and say, here is the best information. That's exactly what we're looking to build America's Safe Aerospace with the data that we're collecting. So it is easy for skeptics or news agencies or anyone to go in and say, okay, here are the interesting ones and here's everything we know about it, and allow them to take the next step in understanding it and take that through the scientific process. Getting academia involved and having those reports where people can invest their time in understanding them in a scientific method and publishing these results, I think is the only way we're going to kind of get the old guard to really pay attention to it. But while that happens, I think the cultural change is already going to happen at the end of the day. I think the cultural change is going to happen prior to academia getting their hands dirty enough to reach any type of conclusion, which is not how we typically want the world to work. But academia has kind of left us to our own devices on here and said, this isn't worth our time. Figure it out on your own. So they have no one to blame but themselves.
Yeah, as you mentioned, paradigm shifting is a tough thing to do.
It is.
Okay, so I assume your organization runs partially on donations, if I'm correct.
Yep.
So how can people find you, and what should they know?
Yeah, you can go to safeaerospace.org. You can learn about what we do. You can donate. You can also become a member. And becoming a member allows access to more information. You get more communication from me, and you get early access to the podcast episodes that we're going to be releasing with witnesses. You can also go to YouTube, Safe Aerospace on YouTube. You can find our channel. There's no videos on it at the moment, but by the time this airs, we'll have several episodes up. So you can go to Safe Aerospace and follow us there. And just subscribing and liking is going to support our work.
Great, and we'll link to it in the description below. Thank you so much for your time, Ryan. It was fascinating.
Thank you, Dushi. This was great.
Thank you very much.